Okay, it's been a minute since last time, but nevertheless, we're back. And so recently, let me take that off. Recently, I had a curious purchase of a couple of Wii U games. The first was Star Fox Zero, and the other was Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. So the reasons specifically why I bought Star Fox Zero, the reason why I had purchased that game is because despite the fact that all years have come out since the game was quote unquote well, not nobody called it bad. They just said that the controls were strange, unwieldy, things like that. But nevertheless, from my watching of YouTube videos, it turns out that people were still talking about the game, if at in a way that's like sparse, but still alive nonetheless. So it got me curious as to try this game out for myself because, well, people are still talking about it. And so when I played Star Fox Zero and beat it for the first time, I said to myself, this game is actually pretty good. Like, no if, ands, or buts about it. It's just good, right? And obviously, I can say that, and it could be a thing where because I prepared myself mentally for the worst, that I did not necessarily receive in the same way that the people who bought it on launch did when they were all saying that the controls are kind of unwieldy and so on and so forth. But with that being said, I kind of want to bring into something that's very, how do you say, very controversial in a sense, where what we go after nowadays, or at least what game devs try to give us nowadays in terms of accessibility and quote unquote intuitive controls, is that there's not necessarily something that is intuitive for the people who are playing video games. And in a sense, you know this because the games that we buy, they come with instruction manuals, or at least they used to. Games nowadays have tutorials that you are forced to play through more often than not. So the reason why I'm saying this is because, in a sense, every video game is someone's first game, essentially. And no matter what that game is, no matter how they try to make it easy to ease a brand new player who has never played this type of game before, there will always be some kind of barrier to entry because we weren't all born with controllers in our hands and had the dexterity in order to maneuver around a 3D and or 2D space because of that. So with all that being said, Star Fox Zero got a lot of heat for its control scheme, and so there's no real easy way for me to maneuver into this next point. Is that some games are not actually meant for the masses. Some games are meant for the people who are there for them. And what I mean by that is the people who will stick around far past the first, second, or third playthrough and actually try to understand what it is that the game is trying to do. But how do you say? During that week where I had the Nintendo Switch Online, I did go back to play the original Star Fox to get an understanding of, what was it originally like and what did Zero bring to the table in its innovations. And what Zero brought to the table was the ability to move and shoot without directing yourself right into the line of fire, which is something that is very frustrating about the original Star Fox that you can't help because of that's the way it's designed. Now, there is some argument that is, intuitive or accessible control scheme because you point and you shoot, but at the same time, it's frustrating when you get to a higher level of play. Like when you get to Andross, in some regard, he is very easy to dodge, but at the same time, let me clarify. He's very easy to dodge because you just look for the place where the projectiles aren't and you head there. But it can be very frustrating because if you miss that window, you have no way of clearing out the blocks that he throws at you because you have to run into the block or at least put yourself in the line of fire to clear a path through. and that is frustrating. What Star Fox Zero does, you play the pilot and the gunman at the same time. And it's in doing those two options that I find people have the hardest thing trying to figure out. But the way that I was able to parse and, figure out how to play was that 90% of the game wants to be played on a TV, right? And then for very specific sections, i.e., when you need the precision, when you are trying to, when you are trying to shoot down Starwolf, a member of Starwolf, or something like that, when the game specifically needs you to look at the gamepad, that's when you are supposed to look down. It's not necessarily a competing thing with one another. It's something that, it's something that is very occasional that you need to look at the gamepad. Now, I say this, and this isn't something that immediately clicked for me because I'm not into rail shooters like that. I enjoy them, but it's not necessarily something that I play all the time. So it took me until like the final encounter with Starwolf for this all to click, because at that point there are no possible buildings for you to run into. And this is another thing, is that generally, if you're not in free range mode, don't take your eyes off the screen. That's what I got out of it. Obviously, there are points where, you can adjust your aim via glancing at the gamepad, but most of the time, you should just keep your eyes on the screen, is what I figured out. But with Starwolf, in free range mode, you're not going to hit anything. You're not going to hit any building. You will get hit by them eventually, if you don't barrel roll out of the way. But nevertheless, because there is nothing for you to hit, you have the freedom to now look down at the gamepad and now precisely aim wherever they are, on the floor, in the sky, not behind you, but something along the lines of that. And the reason why I wanted to, highlight this is because games that have quote-unquote intuitive design or accessible controls can honestly, in some regards, feel a bit homogenous, especially in today's world. And because not a lot of people are willing to put in the time or have the patience to play those type of games, you can end up, casting away something that was really good that really needed just a little bit more time to understand. So my example of this is the infamous God Hand review that one IGN person put out back in the early 2000s that completely sunk the sales of God Hand. Now take this to heart. Well, not to heart, but understand God Hand is not necessarily a game that I would recommend you playing. It's another one of those do your research type of games. Because it has just a lot of imagery that I myself am not comfortable with. But nevertheless, at the time it was the action game of action games, where you had an absurd amount of customizability with the main character, Gene. So to give an example of this, since we're playing Ultimate Ninja Storm 2 right now, if you press the circle button, Naruto will throw out a jab. And that's the first thing he's going to do. He's not going to do his big combo ender with his clones or Rasengan. It's just going to be a jab. However, let's say that you had the ability to do the Rasengan first and then put in his regular jab in somewhere down the line. That is the level of customizability that God Hand brought to the table. And it's not necessarily something that is, seen a lot in today's gaming market, because that's a complex thing. You technically, as a player, you run the risk of your character being bad if you have that kind of customizability. But if you know what you're doing, which I've never seen that before, which most players won't know what they're doing on their first playthrough, because it's your first playthrough, you're still getting used to the game. I forgot what my point was, but nevertheless, it was a very interesting it was interesting in how flexible it was and how much it allowed the player to do and how it allowed their version of Gene to be truly their own version of Gene and to be customizable in that regard. And because of that, I think you need to be more mindful of the type of opinions you take in, because not everyone who plays a game is someone who grew up with the genre, someone who is an expert at the genre. It could just be someone who's in from a completely different, video game background, who's never really tried to put the time into this thing, talking about this game in general. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the case with Star Fox Zero, because I wasn't there. And if you look at reviews nowadays from what they used to be, it's very, or rather, if you have my perspective of being in the future and try to look at someone who made a review back then, it's very difficult to gauge what their mindset was when writing this review. So in that regard, I'll just stay away from that. But I will, I want to leave this topic with a story of me from when I was a kid, right? So when I was younger, my brother, let me restart that. When I was younger, I used to play a lot of fighting games all the time. I played Marvel vs. Capcom, occasionally dipped my toes into Mortal Kombat and things of that nature. So I was very used to playing fighting games, and their controls carried over, for the most part, from one game to another. Then one day, my brother brings home Spider-Man for the PS1. Now, I did have a little bit of experience with playing 3D games from Ocarina of Time, but I never really got far enough in them to, understand fully what that game was trying to do. So first off, me and my brothers are playing the game. They're taking turns. I think I came in late because I don't really have many memories past this point of playing Spider-Man for the PS1, so it's a possibility that I just, came in late. Maybe I was doing homework or something beforehand. I can't really remember now. But nevertheless, when my turn came up to play the game, I asked my brother, how do you web swing? And he said, oh, you press R2. And so I pressed R2, and I web swing to the nearest building. And then I came to the wall, and then I stopped moving. So I pressed left and right because those were the buttons of how to go forward in a fighting game, or forward and backwards of how to go forward in a fighting game. And they moved me to the left and to the right. So I then get, confused, thinking, I have no idea how to scale this building. So I look down at the buttons and I just figure, okay, one of them must be forward. And when I mean buttons, I mean square, triangle, circle, and X. And so when I went to press them, I eventually hit the X button and it threw me off the building. And so at that point, my other brother then took the controller because my turn was over. I lost, game overed, and that was that. That was all for intuitive control. And even, now that I say that, I'm reminded of tank controls and whatnot. And tank controls by themselves aren't necessarily intuitive or intuitive design of how you would move around in a 3D game. But nevertheless, some of the best games of the past have had tank controls. And I don't, if I were, or if many people were to judge a video game by what is intuitive or accessible, then by that margin you would also be lambasting tank controls, because by modern game examples, it's not very intuitive. And I don't think that's a very fair shake to give to video games in general, because, times were different. You had to figure things out in a different way. And I don't know. I personally just don't believe that every game should be put under the same kind of microscope of intuitive controls and accessible controls, because not every game is meant to be figured out immediately. Certain games need time in the oven and you need to come back to them, and that's the design. It's not a mistake. That's how the game is designed to be. But, I think I made my point by now.